Our task now is to delve into fundamental analysis and to learn more about that as a measure of selecting shares. Now, you may be wondering what sources we can draw on. Where can we find this fundamental data? Well, the first source is the most obvious, which is the price page of the newspaper that we've been looking at. And if you look to the left-hand side of each share, you will see that there are three fundamental ratios, the first of which is what's called the earnings yield, abbreviated by means of EY. Then there is what's called the price-earnings ratio, the PE. And finally, the DY, which is the dividend yield. Now, in order for us to understand these fundamental ratios, we would take a simple example, and using easy numbers, for example, let's take a company that makes a net profit after tax of 4 million rands. Now, this is an important figure to the shareholders because it's from the net profit after tax that the shareholders may or may not be paid out their dividend. The company makes 4 million after-tax profit, and we would now want to know how much profit this company has made per share held. In other words, if we were to learn that there were 2 million shares in issue, we would be able to determine that the profit that this company makes per share issued, in other words, known as the EPS, or the earnings per share, is simply the result of dividing the 4 million profit that was made by the 2 million shares in issue. And do you see that if 4 million profit is made and has to be spread among 2 million, that each shareholder, the company will have earned for them 2 rands. So the earnings per share held is a figure of 2 rand per share. Now the company can, if they want to, pay out a dividend, giving each shareholder 2 rand per share held. But remember that it is unlikely that the company will pay out the entire earning as a dividend. Now, given the EPS of 2 rand, we are now able to start looking at the earnings yield. Assume that when you open up your newspaper, new information comes at you in the form of the current market price. You learn that the market price is 10 rand. In other words, you're expected to pay right now a market value of 10 rand for a share that offers a return of 2 rand over a period of 1 year. Now, the relationship between the return from that investment and the cost of that investment is called the earnings yield. And the earnings yield is very simply the earnings per share, the 2 rand return in a year, divided by the cost of the investment, in other words, the market price of the share, multiplied by 100 over 1 to express it as a percentage. So that becomes 2 rand divided by 10 rand times by 100 over 1. So this company has an earnings yield of 20%. Now you can compare that earnings yield to the kind of return that you would get from any other investment. However, keeping in mind all the time that the earnings yield is a 20% return that you may not be paid out directly. It's possible that some of that 2 rand per share the company will retain to grow the organization, but from that you will benefit indirectly. So whether it's a direct or an indirect benefit, we view this company's return as being an earnings yield of 20%. Now, taking it from earnings yield to price earnings ratio is a very simple step called inverting. Because the price earnings and the earnings yield are very similar. It's the same coin we're looking at, it's just that we're looking at heads and then we're looking at tails. So we're really taking the exact same formula and we're turning it upside down. So the price earnings ratio, instead of being earnings per share over price, is the other way around. In other words, it's price over earnings per share. So the PE ratio is the price of the share divided by the earnings per share, and we don't convert that to a percentage, so it's not multiplied by 100 over 1. In our very simple example, we know that the price of the share is 10 rand, and we know that this company is earning at the rate of 2 rand per year. Therefore, if we divide 2 into 10, we get an answer of 5. Now, this is a very important answer. In fact, price-earnings ratios are widely quoted in the financial press. And I would like you to think of that answer as the number of years that it would take at the current rate of earning for this company to repay your investment. Think of it as the number of years it would take at the current rate of earnings for this company to repay your investment. This is what I mean. If this company continues earning at the rate of 2 Rand per share, we would expect that next year it would earn 2 Rand. The second year it would also earn 2 Rand, second year from now. The third year from now would also earn 2 Rand, would earn another 2 Rand in 4 years' time, and another 2 Rand in 5 years' time. In other words, after a period of 5 years, at this rate of earning, the company will have earned 10 Rand against your investment. And remember, of course, that you have paid 10 Rand to purchase the share. So that 5 then tells us that at the current rate of earning, if this company continues to earn at the rate it has been earning, i.e. 2 Rand a share, it will take 5 years of 2 Rand for the company to earn back your investment of 10 Rand. And please note, the relationship between the EY and the PE is that another way of saying that a company is giving you 20% return is that if it gives you 5 years worth of 20% returns, that will cover 100% of the investment amount, which in this case is 10 Rand. So please think of these two as complementary formulas. And generally speaking, the financial press will report price-earnings ratios over earnings yields. Now, the third ratio that we discussed that's available in the newspaper is referred to as the dividend yields. The question we now want to find out is, okay, it's all very well that the company is earning at the rate of 20%, or that it takes 5 years to earn back my investment, but what am I actually getting back in hard returns from that company? What is my dividend yield? And the dividend yield is very simply the dividends that the company pays out per share, which I'm calling DPS, dividend per share, divided by the price of the share at the moment, expressed as a percentage. So therefore, if this company decides that it will pay out a dividend of 1 Rand, remember that it made earnings of 2 Rand and could have paid a dividend up to 2 Rand. If the company decides it will pay out 50% and keep half for itself, then we will expect to receive a dividend of 1 Rand per share, which against our investment price of 10 Rand is a percentage of 10%. So the actual return that we get from investing into the share, based upon the most recent figures, is a 10% return. Now please notice that there's an interesting relationship between the dividend yield and the earnings yield. In that, remember the company pays out half of what it earns. Therefore, if the company is earning at the rate of 20% and it's paying a dividend of half that 20, in other words 10%, then we would understand that this company has paid out half and kept half for itself. So if you were to look in the newspaper and you discovered that the earnings yield for a particular company was 20% and the dividend yield for that company was 5%, you would conclude that this company is paying out 1/4, 5 over 20 is a quarter, 1/4 of what it has available to pay out. In other words, 25% is being paid out as dividend and 75% is being retained by the company. So look to that relationship for the distribution policy of the company, or the percentage which the company retains and pays out. The question we must now ask ourselves is, we now have an understanding of the way in which these ratios are structured, but what can we determine from them? Where from now? What information can we use this for, and how can we assess whether to select a share or not? Well, the general rule is that one shouldn't select one's shares purely on the basis of these ratios. But these ratios are a signal, an alert to us that there's something interesting, that the share is either seemingly very cheap, seemingly very expensive, or highly or poorly rated, so we can detect interesting shares from the newspaper and then do further analysis. And possibly our strongest ally in this regard is the price-earnings ratio. And we would have a look at the price-earnings ratio in relation to the value of the PE for the entire index, which appears at the bottom of each sector. Say, for example, the average PE for a sector is 16, meaning that if I buy these shares in this sector, I will expect to wait 16 years for the company to earn back my investment. And if I look at a particular share for company XYZ, and I notice that the PE is half that, in other words, 8, this will be an alert to me that this share seemingly has got a price-earnings ratio far below that of the average, which means that it would only take 8 years for this company to earn back my investment at the current rate of earnings. Now, that may have two possible interpretations. It may mean that this company's share is relatively inexpensive compared to the average, and therefore we should investigate it as a possible share to buy. Or it may mean that this share is a company that is very poorly rated and it deserves to have a low PE ratio because its profit prospects, the dividend prospects in the future, are very limited. Therefore, it's not a wise decision to simply buy a share off a low PE ratio because it now demands that we do further investigation, further analysis in order to determine which of those is more realistic. On the other hand, if in the same section of the newspaper, a share called ABC has got a PE ratio of 25, which is significantly higher than the average PE for that sector, again we must be careful because there may be two competing explanations for that being much higher. Number one is that the share is relatively expensive compared to the average, and therefore don't buy it. In other words, you would wait 25 years for the company to earn back your investment at the current rate of earnings, if it was earning at that steady rate. However, it may well be that this company has got fantastic prospects and that the high PE ratio is there because it's justified and this company is able to achieve those high levels of earnings in the future. In other words, the share is highly rated. So therefore, to buy a share simply off the newspaper is not good advice. But to use the newspaper to source those shares that we consider to be opportunities or that we'd like to find out more information, that is a good idea. And in the next section, we'll be investigating further as to what more we can do to decide whether or not a share is a good purchase or whether we should leave it alone.